Hello, friends. Thank you for being with me. Subscribe, like, and let's get started.
I remember that moment like it was yesterday. My name is Lindsay. I'm 32 years old, and I honestly don't know what came over me at the time. My sister Danny and I were sitting in the kitchen chatting. The conversation was, to say the least, a little too explicit. I said things I probably shouldn't have said out loud. There are times when you let your emotions out, and then you regret it. That was me. I didn't think he'd hear it. Maybe somewhere in the back of my mind, I didn't care. I told Danny that if I could start over, I wouldn't go out with Derek, my husband. I said it like it was nothing, like it was a bad haircut, and not the man I'd promised to spend my life with. I don't know why I said it. Maybe I was bored. Maybe I wanted my sister to feel sorry for me. Derek was in the other room at that moment, probably flipping through his phone after work like he usually does. But I said it, and then there was silence. It wasn't Danny's silence. She was used to my emotional outbursts. It was a different, heavy silence that made the air feel thicker. I turned my head and saw him. He was standing in the doorway. He didn't yell, didn't ask questions, didn't look angry. Just stared at me for a second or two with a blank expression on his face, and then he left the room. A moment later, I heard the front door slam, and I felt disgusted. I hadn't expected this. I thought he'd get angry, start arguing. But walking away? That wasn't his style. Derek had always been calm, patient, balanced let's call it energy. My sister looked at me with round eyes, clearly not believing I could say such a thing. But instead of admitting the mistake, I pretended it was no big deal. I smirked and said, "It's okay. It'll cool off." Just being dramatic. Why did I say that? Probably because admitting fault would mean facing guilt, and I wasn't ready for that. An hour passed, and he didn't come back. I called him, but he didn't answer. I texted, "Are you okay?" Not a peep back. Okay, if he wants to sulk, that's his business, I thought. I wasn't going to humiliate myself over something I didn't think was that serious. But with each passing hour, I was starting to feel a mixture of anger and anxiety. How could he leave me like this? What was he trying to prove with this? I sat up until midnight, scrolling through videos on my phone and pretending I wasn't waiting for him to come back. But he never came back. In the morning, his side of the bed was empty. His toothbrush was still in the bathroom, his shoes by the door. So he hadn't left for good. But I was still strangely uneasy. I texted him again. "Where are you? We need to talk." There was no reply. By lunchtime, I was starting to get annoyed. Why is he ignoring me? If something's wrong, we should talk about it, not play silent. But Derek has always been different. He prefers to let his emotions cool down, and it drives me crazy. Danny said, "Maybe you should apologize." Apologize? For what? For being honest? I parried. But even as I said it, I realized how pathetic it sounded. By late afternoon, my irritation had peaked. How could he leave me alone and make me feel guilty? Okay, maybe I was really guilty, but I had told the truth. Does that mean I don't love him? Things got more complicated when I wondered if I'd overreacted this time. Derek had always deferred to me, going along with my decisions even when he disagreed. I guess I'd gotten used to taking it for granted. The hours dragged on endlessly, and I still hadn't heard from him. I tried calling his mother, but she hadn't heard from him either. Then I began to worry. What if it wasn't just his resentment? What if something happened to him? Although Derek isn't the type of person to get into trouble. He's always been the most predictable and stable person I've ever known. Sometimes it was annoying, but right now I'd give anything to get back to that stability. As darkness fell, my thoughts turned into sheer chaos. Anger, anxiety, despair all mixed together. I wanted to write to him again, but I was afraid of sounding desperate. Instead, I just sat there, staring at my phone, hoping it would finally light up with a message. But the screen remained blank. The next day it happened again. It still wasn't there. I tried to stay calm, but every sound outside the window made my heart jump. I checked my phone over and over again, as if I might somehow miss his answer. Nothing. Not a word. My irritation grew. Who does that? Who just leaves without telling their wife where they're going? It was ridiculous and frankly childish behavior. But then a thought came to me that I didn't want to admit. What if he really did think it was over? What if I'd gone too far this time? Derek never played the silent treatment. If he left, it had to be for a good reason. Maybe even more serious than I wanted to admit. Danny called me this afternoon. Her voice sounded softer than usual, like she was afraid to scare me off. Did you hear from him? She asked cautiously. No, I cut her off. It's ridiculous. He's making a big deal out of it. Lind, she said, choosing her words, but you're the one who made a big deal out of it. I wanted to hang up. Shouldn't she be on my side? Instead, I just blurted out, you're supposed to support me. But even as I said it, I felt a pang of guilt. She was right. In a way, it was really me who had set it all up. I didn't mean to hurt him. I didn't think he'd take it so personally. People talk all the time. Does that make them bad? By late afternoon, I realized I couldn't wait any longer. If he didn't come back on his own, I'd find him. I called his mother again, but she wouldn't tell me anything new. Then I dialed a few of his friends, but none of them knew where he was. One, Mark, was even surprised to hear me ask, "Is everything okay with you?" He asked. I struggled to keep from snapping out of it. "Everything's fine," I answered quickly. "Just checking in." After that, I got in my car and drove around the city for an hour, having no idea where I was going. Derek was never one to hang out in bars or sleep over at friends' houses. He was predictable, but right now, he was nowhere to be found. When I got home, the house greeted me with silence. His toothbrush was still in the bathroom. His shoes were still by the door. These things were like ghosts reminding me that he should be here, but he wasn't. I stood in the kitchen, keeping my eyes on the front door, begging it to open. But nothing happened. In desperation, I opened our bank account just to keep myself busy. And then I saw it, a transaction for a hotel room. He was alive, not at my mom's, not at a friend's house, and thank goodness not with anyone else. He was in a hotel, alone. I didn't know what to feel, relief or rage. He was just hiding from me. I immediately called the hotel, not knowing what I was going to say if he answered. But it didn't matter. The operator politely but firmly refused to give me any information. "I'm sorry, ma'am, but we don't release any information about our guests." I almost screamed. Instead, I hung up and started writing a message. "I know where you are. Stop acting like a child. Come home so we can talk." I stared at the text for a few minutes and then deleted it. If he wanted to act like a coward, let him. I wasn't going to grovel. But that lump in my stomach still wouldn't go away. I hated the feeling of being helpless. He was supposed to be the one who forgave me, who accepted my emotions and moved on. But now things didn't go the way they always did. The next morning, I woke up again to an empty house. The silence was already starting to drive me crazy. I tried to focus on work, but every email reminded me that the real problem was going nowhere. My husband was gone, and I had no idea what to do. By lunchtime, I couldn't take the unknown anymore. No more. I headed to the hotel, not thinking about how it might look from the outside. If he's not going to come to me, I'm going to go to him. At the front desk, I was greeted by the same polite but indifferent smile of the receptionist. "I'm sorry, ma'am, but we can't give out information about our guests," she said with polite detachment. "He's my husband." I couldn't help but burst out. She smiled sweetly and repeated, "I'm sorry, ma'am." Defeated, I walked out to the car and sank into the seat, feeling like a complete fool. As I stared at the steering wheel, I felt fear rising in my chest. Real fear, the kind I hadn't allowed myself to feel in years. What if he didn't come back? What if I really had gone too far? And what if it wasn't just about what I'd said to Danny? This wasn't the first time I'd let my tongue run wild without thinking about his feelings. Maybe this time I'd crossed the line. But even then, I wasn't ready to apologize. Not yet. I needed to see him first, make sure he was okay, and try to turn the situation to my advantage somehow. After all, if there's one thing I know how to do, it's get out of trouble. And this situation was just another one of those things, right? It didn't take long, though. Late that night, after a failed visit to the hotel, the front door finally opened. He walked in calmly, too calmly. He didn't slam the door, didn't throw his keys, as I probably would have done. He just set his bag down by the couch and paused, as if considering what to say. His face was completely impenetrable, which was even more frightening than if he'd been yelling. "We need to talk," he finally said, his voice flat, almost cold. "Oh, really?" I snapped, crossing my arms over my chest. I was already on the defensive, even though I knew I should apologize first. But I couldn't start with that. It seemed like admitting guilt was giving him some kind of power over me, and I wasn't ready for that. He sat down on the couch, gesturing for me to join him. But I remained standing, leaning against the kitchen counter, as if I didn't have time to waste on such trivialities. "Are you going to explain why you just ignored me for 2 days?" I said, trying to sound casual, but my voice betrayed my irritation. Derek sighed and rubbed his hands together like he was trying to warm them. "I needed space," he said, his voice soft but determined. To figure out how to even talk to you after what I'd heard." "Oh, come on, Derek." I rolled my eyes. "You heard one phrase, spoken in private to my sister, and suddenly you're making a tragedy out of it?" "It wasn't just a phrase, Lindsay," he replied, his voice rising a little, but he quickly pulled himself together. "You said you'd never go out with me if you could turn back the clock." "Well, maybe I wouldn't," I blurted out before I could stop myself. The words hung in the air, and for a second I regretted them. But then, as always, I redoubled my defenses. "You've changed, Derek. We both know that. You're not the man I married anymore. You're—" I hesitated, trying not to sound too harsh, but my emotions took over. "You've gotten lazy, you know? You've neglected yourself. You don't even try. Can you blame me for how I feel?" There was a pain in his eyes that I couldn't ignore. But instead of getting angry, he just nodded slowly, as if he'd been expecting it. "So this is it," he said quietly. "Do you think I've become bloated and unattractive, and you regret our being together because of it?" "Don't twist my words." I rolled my eyes again. "I didn't say I didn't want to be with you. I said that if I could, I might have made a different choice." "That's not the same thing." "It sounds the same to me," he said in an even voice. "And, you know, maybe you're right. I've changed. I've gotten older, gained weight. I've become comfortable. But that's normal, Lindsay. That's what happens when you're married. You organize your life together. You build it, and you have to be a part of it. Don't you?" My face is red with shame and anger. "Don't take it out on me," I shouted, feeling my emotions rushing out. "You think I don't notice how distant you've become? How you barely talk to me except about work or bills? You give me no reason to be happy about our marriage, Derek." "So it's my fault now," he said quietly but incredulously. "It's my fault you're unhappy. Is it my fault that you don't respect me enough to keep such talk with my sister out of my ears?" I threw up my hands in frustration. "You're turning this around. All I'm trying to say is that maybe you should have tried a little harder. Maybe if you took a little more care of yourself, went to the gym, showed interest in me like you used to, I wouldn't feel like this." I blurted out, no longer trying to soften my words. He stared at me for a long time, and there was no anger or resentment in his gaze, just a strange, heavy weariness. Then he got up slowly, looked me straight in the eye, and said, "You know, Lindsay, I think that says more about you than it does about me." "What's that supposed to mean?" I blurted out, feeling a rush of panic. He didn't yell, didn't argue, and it was his calm, that made me feel even smaller. "It means," he said in an even voice, "that you don't appreciate what you have. You don't notice the person who's always been there for you, who supported you in all your impulsive decisions, who's turned a blind eye to your spending, who's adjusted to your moods. Instead of appreciating that, you're looking for something to blame me for." I opened my mouth to respond, but he wasn't finished. "I know I'm not perfect. I've changed, but you've changed too. And not in a way that makes our marriage any easier. You become a person who doesn't want to take responsibility, who flares up instead of talking, and who prefers to blame others instead of looking in the mirror." His words hit me like a slap in the face. But instead of admitting he was right, I flared up again. "So now you're the saint who's been dragging this marriage down, and I'm the problem?" He shook his head and, picking up his bag, looked at me again. "No, I'm not a saint. But at least I'm trying to be a better one. As for standing here and letting you make me feel like I'm not good enough, I'm done with that. If you don't see the value in me anymore, maybe we should take a step back." I froze. "You're saying dash," my voice shook. "What I'm saying is that I need more than that." He made a gesture with his hand, as if drawing us together. "And if you're not willing to work on that, then maybe I shouldn't stay here." He didn't yell, he didn't slam the door, he just walked out. And I was left standing there, shocked and confused. In the weeks that followed, reality hit me with unexpected force. Derek didn't come back. He didn't even stop by to pick up the mail. Every time I entered the house, I felt that weight of emptiness. The pain of his absence was not only physical, but emotional. I began to write to him more often, trying to find some kind of connection. The replies were short, polite, but cold. I hope you're doing well. I'll pick up my stuff this weekend. That was it. No warmth, no attempt to start conversation. When the weekend came, I dreaded seeing him. He walked into the house, and I barely recognized him. His shoulders seemed broader, his posture straighter. His beard was neatly trimmed, and the smell of a light but expensive cologne emphasized the change. He looked better than he had in years, and for some reason that stung me the most. "Hi," I said uncertainly, standing at the kitchen counter. "Hi," he answered briefly, nodding but not adding anything. Without further ado, he walked to the bedroom and started packing his things into boxes. I followed him, not knowing what to say, but desperate to break the silence. "Derek, can we talk?" My voice sounded quieter than I expected. He didn't stop. "About what?" "About us," I answered, taking a step closer. He turned to me, his face impenetrable. "What's there to talk about, Lindsay? You've made it very clear what you think." "That's not what I meant." I objected hastily. "I was just angry, and I didn't think no, I did," he interrupted. "Yes, you did," he interrupted, looking me straight in the eye. "You just didn't think I'd hear it." A lump came to my throat, but I forced myself to continue. "I didn't mean to hurt you." "But you did." His voice was firm. "And it wasn't just that conversation. It's everything. Your tone, your attitude toward me. I keep feeling like I'm not good enough for you." Tears came to my eyes, but I held them back. "We can fix this. We've been through worse, haven't we?" He grinned bitterly. "Are you sure? Because I don't remember ever feeling so unwanted." "So that's it? You're giving up?" My voice shook, and I hated how desperate it sounded. "I'm not giving up," he answered flatly. "I'm choosing me. I'm tired of proving my worth to someone who can't see it." I stared at him, trying to realize that this was really happening. He should have forgiven me, told me we'd make things right. But instead, he looked calm and determined, like he'd made his decision a long time ago. "I can change," I whispered, but his eyes told me that it might not be enough. "I'll be better," I said in a near whisper. "I can change." He sighed and gently set the box on the floor. "Lindsay, I hope you do change. But not for my sake, but for your own. I can't wait any longer for you to realize that. I've spent years trying to make you happy, and all I get in return is criticism and resentment. I deserve better than that." His words hurt me more than I could have expected. Tears rolled down my cheeks, and this time I didn't even try to hide them. "I don't want to lose you," I said, feeling my voice break. "Please, Derek, we can fix this." He looked at me long and hard. For a moment, I thought there was something in his eyes, maybe regret or even pity. But then he shook his head. "I've already lost too much of myself trying to fix things," he said quietly. "I can't do this anymore." He picked up the box and walked out of the room. I was left standing there, feeling my heart being torn to pieces. I wanted to rush after him, to beg him to stay, but I knew it wouldn't change anything. He was ready to leave, and for the first time, I realized that I really could lose him forever. Over the next few days, I tried to distract myself. I worked from morning till night, went out with friends, did everything I could to avoid being alone. But everywhere I went, emptiness followed me. Derek wasn't just gone physically. He took a piece of me with him. A month passed, and I saw him again. He was sitting at a cafe at a table with a strange woman. She was beautiful, but not flamboyantly so, but somehow natural, effortless. They were laughing, and he looked happy, happier than I'd seen him in years. I was seized with the urge to burst in there, to interrupt their moment, and remind them that I was still his wife. But I didn't. I just stood there, watching them from afar, feeling the weight of my mistakes. It was my fault. I'd pushed him away myself, broken his trust, and now he'd moved on without me. When he noticed me, his smile faded slightly, but he didn't look angry or upset. He just nodded slightly, as if acknowledging my presence, and then went back to talking. To him, I was already something of the past, a memory he'd left behind. As I walked out of the cafe, the weight of my decisions fell on me. I'd spent so much time blaming him, picking at his flaws, that I hadn't noticed how much he'd given me. And now it was too late. For the first time in my life, I felt truly alone. And for the first time, I realized that Derek wasn't the problem. I was the problem. The days dragged on, and I kept trying to figure out what to do next. Everything that had once made sense seemed to be gone with Derek. I look back at old pictures of us, reread messages, and each time it only made me feel more lost. But slowly I began to realize, if I didn't change, this loneliness would become my constant companion. One evening, sitting in an empty apartment, I allowed myself to be honest with myself for the first time in a long time. All this time I tried to blame others' parents, friends, Derek, but I'd never questioned why I was so unhappy myself. The answer was uncomfortable. I was afraid. Afraid of being vulnerable, afraid to admit my mistakes, afraid that if I gave someone too much, I'd be left empty-handed. I signed up for therapy, even though the idea seemed absurd to me at first. But with each session, I began to see my mistakes, my fears, and most importantly, my possibilities. It was a long journey full of tears, introspection, and small victories. It was several months before I saw Derek again. It was at the supermarket, a banal scene I didn't expect to experience with such a lump in my throat. He was walking with the same woman he'd seen in the cafe, and they looked happy. I froze, not knowing what to do. This time he noticed me first. He walked over, holding a basket in his hand, and smiled slightly. "Hi, Lindsay," he said, his voice soft but reserved. "Hi, Derek," I replied, trying to hide my awkwardness. We exchanged a couple of phrases, nothing significant like life, like work, but I saw something new in his eyes. Respect, but not the deep respect I'd seen before. It was neutral, without the warmth that had warmed me before. "You look good," I said finally, and it sounded sincere. "Thank you," he replied. "So do you." That brief conversation was a point for me. I realized that holding on to the past was like trying to hold sand in my hands. The more you squeeze, the less there is left. After that meeting, I began to really let go of it. I focused on myself, on my goals, on what brought me joy. I started painting again, even though I had given that up years ago. I found new friends who supported me through the best and worst moments. One day I looked at an old picture of me and Derek. The smile on my face was bright, and his gaze was warm. It was a moment when we both believed we could do anything together. I smiled, but no longer in pain. Derek was a part of my life, an important part, but not the only part. He helped me see what I could be if I stopped being afraid. And even though we'd gone our separate ways, I was grateful for everything he'd given me. In the end, I realized sometimes love doesn't end, it just changes form. It becomes a lesson that helps you become a better person. And that was the most important lesson of my life. And that's where today's story ends. Thank you for watching to the end. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to like and comment. We'd love to discuss this story with you. See you in the next video.